Okay, everybody, building on the energetics topic, I want to talk about brainwaves and basically what was known dating back to 70s, 80s within our own government, military, what kind of research had been done, how it's been expanded since then, and what kind of studies have been ongoing about the effects of different technologies on our brain frequency, on our brain waves, our ELF, extremely low frequency, what sometimes people call their alpha state, their ability to meditate at the 8 to 12 hertz range. And so I put this picture here and showing, brain waves and longitudinal waveforms, because a lot of times people see something like this with a head and all the matrix grid and all this talk about a gateway experience, and they associate it with new age type nonsense like I would have. And what I'd like to tell you is that I pulled this straight from a U.S. Army report called Analysis and Assessment of the Gateway Process, dated from 1983. And it goes into great detail. I've quoted this in my last article on Energetics 8. So I want to build upon this a little bit to kind of demonstrate to you that, yes, that does look a little bit sci-fi and new age and that type of thing, but there's a real, you know, concept involving how we interact with one another, how we perceive reality, how there's no solid matter, things of that nature, and that we're vibrational frequency beings, as it were. So a lot of this, some of this language that's co-opted by things that I think that I personally find a little bit off-putting, like New Age things. I've found science that basically, I would say, validates a lot of the things that are contained in that, and that's why I want to provide more information to sort of say, like, look, you don't have to be within that group or adopt their value system or hang with that to understand these concepts. You really can just reference some of this documentation, which I'm going to leave all in stills at the end of this presentation so you can freeze frame and copy on your own. Getting to that, I'm going to quote from the Gateway Experience report here. I already did before, but I think it's important before I start the discussion as far as what studies were done involving cellular phone technology or wireless phone technology. This is a study that I'm going to quote later on involving GSM. It's an older technology, but it's still relevant to the way electromagnetic frequency, the proximity of a handset to the human skull can affect your ELF brainwaves. So I wanted to talk about the actual numbers here first. I'm going to take from the brain stimulation quote here, part 9 of the report, where it says that the brain is contained in a tight membrane called the dura, which is in turn cushioned by a thin layer of fluid located between it and the skull. As the coherent resonance produced by the human heart in a state of profound relaxation reaches the fluid layer surrounding the brain, it sets up a rhythmic pattern in which the brain moves up and down approximately 0.005 to 0.010 millimeters in a continuous pattern. The self-reinforcing character of resonant behavior accounts for the body's ability to sustain this movement despite the minimal level of energy involved. In this way, the entire body, based on its own micromotion, functions as a tuned vibrational system which transfers energy in a range of between 6.8 and 7.5 hertz into the Earth's ionospheric cavity, which itself resonates at about 7.75 hertz. So this is getting into the concepts involving the Schumann Resonance, as many people are familiar with. I've quoted that documentation many times in my material. You can go back through a lot of my previous bioenergetics research to look into that. But I wanted to move on to the next part of this that discusses more about frequencies in general, because a lot of times you'll hear people say that we're resonant, we're beings of frequency, or we're resonant beings of frequency and things of that nature, And it seems a little bit hokey and new age, which honestly, in as far as terminology goes, it does come off that way. But there's a certain degree of accuracy that you have to lend to it, really when you're thinking this through. Basically, just discussing how that you're at 70 degrees Fahrenheit, an atom oscillates at the rate of 10 to 15 hertz. An entire molecule composed of a number of atoms bound together in a single energy field vibrates in the range of 10 to the 9 hertz. A live human cell vibrates at approximately 10 to the third power hertz. The point to be made is that the entire human being, brain, consciousness, and all is like the universe which surrounds him, nothing more or less than an extraordinarily complex system of energy fields. Okay? So that when you go back then and look at that illustration, it doesn't really seem to be that new age, does it? It seems to be quite accurate when you look at this, the left hemisphere consciousness grid. acts like the mind's computer software to reduce input from the right hemisphere to verbal symbols and concepts. And when you really study this and try to visualize it, and I added, by the way, the color to this. This was only black and white. I added the waveforms from some of the research that I was doing. So that's why I'm integrating in this presentation here. And it says consciousness energy grid. So what I would challenge you to do, I guess, is to try to visualize these waveforms, longitudinal waveforms, and various spirals and coils, and try to visualize those types of things as you think through your own brain processes, that you have frequencies that are emanating, that are able to be received and are sent out, your influence upon others, what you do with your energy to others. The right hemisphere consciousness grid reduces three-dimension holographic image to two-dimensional go, no-go. Sorry, that's been omitted. That was in the original documentation. I guess the copy was bad. But the point is that a lot of these times these things are sounded like when they say that we kind of live in a matrix grid, or people try to hypothesize these things. Well, yes and no. I mean, really, if you think about it, we're still vibrational energy. We're still energetics of some sort, right? We're still this energy mass of some sort that's interacting with other masses of energy, whatever you want to call that, whatever you perceive that to be, right? Whatever your belief system is. I think it all fits. So getting into that, like, what are the things that are out there right now that can impact everybody as a whole on their physiological brain processes? And this is where you have to lend a little bit of credibility to people's concerns about cellular phone technology in general. I'm not even going to pretend that I can pronounce these people's names here, so I'll just leave this up here. I apologize, but the name of this study is called Mobile Phone Emission Modulates Interhemispheric Functional Coupling of EEG Alpha Rhythms. This is a brief slide. I'll just read it really quick. It says, we tested the working hypothesis that electromagnetic fields from mobile phones, EMFs, affect interhemispheric synchronization of cerebral rhythms, an important physiological feature of information transfer into the brain. 10 subjects underwent two electroencephalographs, EEG, recordings, separated by 1 week following a crossover double-blind paradigm in which they were exposed to a mobile phone signal, Global System for Mobile Communications, GSM. That's a older iteration of existing technology, cell phone technology. The mobile phone was held on the left side of the subject head by a modified helmet and oriented in the normal position for use over the ear. The microphone was oriented towards the corner of the mouth, and the antenna was near the head in the periotemporal area. In addition, we positioned another similar phone, but without battery, on the right side of the helmet to balance the weight and to prevent the subject localizing the site of GSM stimulation and consequently lateralizing attention. I think that that's to suggest that they're trying to make sure that the brain doesn't just perceive the weight of the device in its assessment of your brain waves, or like the blocking potentially of an external source. So I think what they were doing was placing a dummy phone on one side that did nothing and an active phone on the other side that did something. So I think I might have mischaracterized that when I discussed it in other presentations, so I apologize. Moving on to this. In one session, the exposure was real, GSM, while in the other it was sham. So again, the dummy handset on one, the real one on the other. Both sessions lasted 45 minutes. Functional interhemispheric connectivity was modeled using the analysis of EEG electroencephalograph spectral coherence between frontal, central, parietal electrode pairs. Individual EEG rhythms of interest were delta, about 2 to 4 hertz, theta, about 4 to 6 hertz, alpha, 1, about 6 to 8 hertz, alpha 2, about 8 to 10 hertz, and alpha 3, about 10 to 12 hertz. Results showed that compared to sham stimulation, GSM stimulation modulated the interhemispheric frontal and temporal coherence at alpha 2 and alpha 3 bands. The present results suggest that prolonged mobile phone emission affects not only cortical activity, but also the spread of neural synchronization conveyed by interhemispheric function coupling of EEG rhythms. Now let's go back to this visual. You can kind of see, once you start to contextualize that and think about what they're discussing here about the hemisphereing of your brain, and then you realize that our own government, within our own research, the things that we were acknowledging internally was that we are, sort of a vibrational frequency, beings, that this is a key element of how we process thoughts and how we interact with one another and how we perceive reality. I think you have to lend some credibility to people's concerns about technology. It would be foolish to do otherwise. And so that was something that was dated from the 80s. So a lot of people don't realize that this research continued on, and they were really trying to master it A lot of this research moved on to like places that are typically, I guess you could say, assigned or blamed to it, which is like Stanford Research Institute. They're commonly quoted in paranormal psi phenomenon. But really, a lot of the staff from Stanford Research was, I guess, taken over, or rather, maybe, I don't know if they transferred, or I'm not sure what the story is, but a lot of them moved over to a lab that was a subsidiary of Science Applications International Corporation. I think eventually folded into the, corporation as such. And a lot of that staff, I've downloaded tons of their documentation from CIA.gov's Freedom of Information Act library that's been declassified. So things that were around the 90s have been declassified more recently. So I have some of that documentation here because I commonly discuss it in my material and SAIC's role in all this. And they did one called, you can download from that, and I'll put all the document numbers inside the description here. It's called Significant Preliminary AMP Experimental Results of the Science Applications International Corporation. So just quoting really briefly to show you what they did. As part of the activity's external R&D contract, SAIC has been conducting basic research into the nature of anomalous mental phenomenon, AMP. During fiscal year 1993, so again, this is the 90s, mid-90s, 3 significant experimental results were obtained. Although the data is still undergoing evaluation, preliminary analysis indicate that the results are considered to be a breakthrough nature in anomalous mental phenomena research. These results could significantly enhance our capability to perform our mission. Entropy experiment. Previous research by SAIC under the contract had identified a physical variable from communications theory that could be applied to anomalous cognition AC research to identify meaningful differences among target types and explain why all targets are not equally sensed by AC capabilities. The variable, called entropy, may be defined as a measure of the information inherent in a target. Laboratory experimental activities demonstrated a significant degree of correlation between AC success and dynamic changes in the target's entropy. This is the first time in the history of AC investigations that a physical variable has been correlated with any AC anomalous cognition activity. The potential value added of this experimental result to the Stargate program is twofold. Those not familiar, Stargate is pretty much always the big program that's associated with really the weirder psi phenomena. So taking a quick break from that, back into it. First, it should now be possible to pre-assess the information content of a given target so that taskings may be chosen which should have the highest potential for successful data acquisition. This should improve the overall quality of data gathered by AC. Secondly, if the information content of a target is known, then the difference in data acquisition from that target should be directly related to the skill of a viewer. It should therefore be possible to develop an objective method of assessing AC skills using these experimental results. Alpha desynchronization. It is an established neurological fact that a brain in idle generates alpha waves at approximately 10 Hz, and that these waves diminish significantly whenever the brain's idle state is interrupted by an external stimuli. EEG and electroencephalograph experiments conducted by Science Applications International Corporation seems to have demonstrated for the first time in AC research that reception of an AC signal by the brain does in fact interrupt the alpha rhythm in the same manner as would any other external signal. This is called Event Related Desynchronization, ERD. The potential value added of this experimental result is the potential use of ERD to improve AC functioning, analogous to the method in which biofeedback can be used to train a person to alter his physiological responses. This experiment demonstrated that changes in the electrical properties of one person's skin could be affected according to the intent of an isolated operator and indicates that AMP can be used to remotely influence biological systems. Really consider what that amounts to and think about what that really translates to when you're reading through this report. And I'm going to create stills of all this and put it at the end of my presentation here so you can read it on your own. But remember, we were studying how to interrupt that process, how to master that process. They talked about their mission. This was a big deal, and it was all part of Project Stargate. You can look that up. Nearly everything that's related to remote viewing, psi phenomenon, telekinesis, anything paranormal that we have officially acknowledged anywhere is going to be related to that. So now that you've seen a cell phone study that basically, getting back to that, talks about how That particular GSM phone study demonstrated there is a little bit of interruption at the alpha 2 and alpha 3 states. So that's between 8 to 10 hertz on alpha 2, 10 to 12 hertz on alpha 3. Think this through a little bit. We're having to go back to the material a little bit and remember that we've already acknowledged that we basically operate as vibrational frequencies and that this is the core element of that vibrational frequency is within that range. So yes, when they talk about their mission, this is the ultimate weapon, right? So to validate that, let's get into some research that pre-existed the governments and things and was more related to Robert Beck, Bob Beck, I guess he goes by sometimes. There's a report out there called ELF, Magnetic Fields and EEG Entrainment. I'm not going to read the entire thing here, but I will include as many slides that I have from it for your own review. But I wanted to just read this first part because I think a lot of people don't give a lot of honest credibility to some of the concerns people have about the effects of frequency on the brain. What are the overall impacts of all this contribution of various frequencies into our environment? Are we studying it effectively? I'm not trying to make any claims of anything aside to say that, I do believe that there's reason to be concerned and that judging by all the information you've seen so far, this should really be something that I would hope would, motivate you to look further into it and decide for yourself. So I'll start here. Clinical research indicates that somewhere between 25 to 75% of human and animal subjects may exhibit marked psychological sensitivity to extremely low frequency ELF, magnetic and electrical fields. Brainwave entrainment can be demonstrated and electroencephalographically when subjects are in the vicinity of oscillations in the frequency range of approximately 3 to 20 hertz at intensities of below 100 nanoteslas. That's important to remember when you're doing measurements on your own. If you get an EM meter that's of a good quality, this is extremely good information to have for you because you can actually set your EM meter to sweep between these ranges. So if you begin to take this information seriously and you're trying to understand the effects that it has on your body better for yourself, I would recommend you really take this material seriously because Robert Beck is considered a huge authority on these things. ELF fields of 6.67 hertz, 6.26 hertz, and lower tend to produce symptoms of confusion, anxiety, depression, tension, fear, mild nausea, and headaches. Arthritic-like aches, insomnia, extended reaction times, hemispheric EEG desynchronization, as was discussed earlier, and many other vegetative disturbances. H and B field magnetic vector oscillations of 7.8, 8.0, and 9 Hz produce anxiety relieving and stress reducing effects mimicking some meditative states. See how we've been talking about alpha state, the earth resonance being at 7.83 Hz, how when you reach that state you can sometimes tap into that frequency. This report validates what we've been talking about here. And this, again, it just demonstrates it's not new, okay? I'm not claiming any of this is. I'm just trying to get it all into a cohesive work of information here that people can actually understand and place together logically that doesn't take up too much of their time. So anyways, getting back to it, it has been speculated that frequencies in this range may be universally permeating clock frequencies or carriers on which mind or consciousness states can be impressed and interact with other life forms in the nebulous realms of ESP, psychotronics, distant healing, radiesthesia, and related paranormal but anecdotal phenomenon. Coherent ELF energies have unique and interesting property of almost lossless propagation within the Earth ionospheric cavity waveguide, and attenuation of these signals due to distance from transmitter sites is negligible. So remember what we talk about, again, getting back to the Schumann resonance, the Earth cavity. What are you really doing when you're practicing astral travel, when you're experiencing telepathic communication, when you might be actually communicating with somebody who's passed on, those types of things? You're in the earth cavity where the energy continues on, really. Think this through a little bit. These things should no longer be considered esoteric or hard to believe. We should really be at a point where the science is there to place it all together into something cohesive that you shouldn't roll your eyes when you see these things or hear about them. The established physics of radio propagation therefore suggests that vast geographical areas can be readily mood manipulated by transmissions of EM energy within the Earth ionosphere cavity waveguide. The accidental discovery in 1938 of the Luxembourg effect, by which a transmitter of relatively low power fed to an antenna array producing a circularly polarized signal, can piggyback to any pre-existing RF energy source and produce disturbances of the ionosphere at any frequency desired, which then modulates all other energies within that waveguide, is fully described in literature 40 years ago, but probably forgotten or overlooked by today's technologists. Very true. And I don't know if you heard about this, but there's been reports that I can't remember if it was like a Cold War thing where there was like an ELF wave that was transmitted from some high power, like huge antenna grid. And I think it took something like a year for it to circulate. Something like, how they determined that, I don't entirely know. But yeah, I thought that was pretty trippy because it just takes, it wouldn't stop going. It would keep recirculating in the ionosphere, I think was the way it worked. So Bob Beck gives a little bit of his history here. I won't get into all that, but starting a little bit into here, he says he had the unique opportunity to make electroencephalograph recordings of the brain and wave patterns of a number of truly exceptional subjects in the U.S. and Hawaii who were famous or had demonstrated established reputations as psychics, healers, medicine men, dowsers, etc. And then I'll just quote reading from his perspective here. Since I had a wealth of personal contacts in both the scientific establishment and psychic underground communities, I was fortunate for the opportunity of meeting and being allowed to wire up and instrument a cross-section of sensitives from vastly different disciplines, ranging from charismatic Christian faith healers to an authentic Hawaiian kahuna to practitioners of Wicca, Hex, Santeria, radiesthesia, radionics, seers, ESP, readers, psychics, etc., etc. A striking number of these authentic sensitives exhibited a nearly identical EEG signature when reporting that they were in their working state of consciousness, a state persisting from 1 to several seconds intermittently during the altered state of consciousness phase of the paranormal activity. The signal appeared to be an almost sine wave of up to 25 microvolts as read monopolar frontal to occipital midline and 7.8 to 8.0 hertz in the frequency or on the alpha theta borderline. Okay, discussing the brainwave frequencies and the various states you can be in, but also 7 to 8 hertz is within the Schumann resonance. That's the alpha theta borderline. So we've been talking lately about the Kundalini experience that some people in these communities discuss. The interaction with your pineal gland, the types of things that can occur when you experience the spinal energy combined with the pineal gland. When those energies meet, that theta, I think that's where the alpha and theta borders are meeting, and that's why that's such a relevant data point. And why things that merge these two energies, or whether it's a ritual practice or meditation or whatever, or energy work, that when a person achieves this state, I think that's what they're doing. They're just taking these signals, and it's just like it's just amplifying at a magnitude of whatever, kind of getting back to the Army document. So when a lot of these things, like they'll make fun of them as concepts involving your brain frequencies and things like that, but I can assure you that there's a lot to this. So getting on to Bob Beck's report here, though. The serendipitous discovery was unexpected in that although the subjects were practicing opposing disciplines and coming from totally disparate teachings and viewpoints, and would barely acknowledge the existence or authenticity of practitioners outside of their belief system, they all appeared to be, quote, marching to the sound of the same cosmic drummer, unquote, when in an altered state of consciousness. So meaning, even though they come from different backgrounds and are practicing different things, he noticed that as far as the raw measurements, they all seemed to be doing the same thing when they practiced whatever their quote-unquote magic was, or whatever made them a mystic, or whatever gave their practice a little bit more of a paranormal element to it. So after replicating this observation a number of times at sites thousands of miles apart, the obvious question arose that if these exceptional people, unbeknown to each other, were falling into the same cosmic consciousness mode, what or where was a signal to which their brain waves became entrained? What was the drummer? Is there a clock or synchronizing signal presence? In 1952, physicist W.O. Schumann postulated mathematically that our Earth and ionosphere constituted a cavity waveguide whose physical constants and magnetic field would oscillate at a resonant frequency identical to the range of human brain waves. In 1962, our National Bureau of Standards Division of Radio Propagation reported the actual physical detection and instrumental recordings of these signals, and as predicted, tracings were indistinguishable from encephalographic recordings from human brainwaves. This newly discovered phenomenon was dubbed Earth brainwave. Since there is a pronounced node in the Schumann resonance at 7 to 8 Hertz, the question of possible EEG and ELF interconnectedness appears to be an irresistible area for investigation. I agree. So I'm not sure how much more I want to get into the report and everything, except I do want to get to the end of it here. there's a part that I thought was super interesting. It says, so he talks about how he wanted to go back and visit some of these psychics and everything and do more experiments. So I thought I'd explain one of them so you can kind of understand the dynamic of magnetic resonance, why the coil is integrated into occult work and esoteric things sometimes, and what it relates to as far as merging those esoteric practices into what they're actually doing in a scientific level with brainwave frequency, okay? Because a lot of these people use these coiled antennas, and it's something you need to be on the look for. The next effort at inducing psychic awareness was to place a 9-foot diameter coil of about 100 turns of number 28 magnet wire on the floor of the laboratory and expose subjects to the real-time magnetic replica of the highly amplified Schumann signal sensed at a remote location to avoid feedback. Results with individuals and groups experiencing this magic circle were dramatically successful. The third-generation investigations were extended to determine if subjects' brainwaves could be influenced by artificially generated magnetic oscillations of sine waves of low intensity and at specific frequencies within the range occurring naturally. Some subjects exhibited absolute brainwave entrainment over the range of approximately 6 to 14 Hz and at a signal strength of approximately 100 nanoteslas. Onset of phase frequency lock on average from 1 second to 4 seconds from the time of switching on the artificial ELF generator and would sometimes last for the duration of the stimulus, usually 10-second episodes. Pretty interesting. One subject displayed absolute entrainment when he was placed inside a triple-shielded magnetic iron and triple electrostatic Faraday cage. The artificial ELF stimulus was originating from a pocket-sized battery-powered device positioned outside the shielded room and 12 foot removed from the subject. Tuning the device over a wide frequency range caused subject's EEG to exactly follow the stimulus. So how interesting is that? So like in that controlled environment, they would synchronize to it. After demonstrating the neurological responses of sensitive individuals and doing preliminary mapping of subjective states as reported for various specific frequencies, defined to 1/100th Hertz on a digital frequency counter attached to the ELF generator, experiments were undertaken on a broader scale with totally unaware subjects, such as customers at local coffee shops during rush hours. This obviated the variables of suggestion, expectancy, or hypnosis. Anecdotal data amassed suggested that a pocket-sized transmitter at power levels of under 100 milliwatts could drastically alter the moods of unsuspecting persons, and that vast geographical areas could be surreptitiously mood manipulated by invisible and remote transmissions of EM energy, electromagnetic energy. Tests were rapidly abandoned and after dramatic proof were, Tests were rapidly abandoned after dramatic proof because of ethical considerations, meaning they obviously knew that they couldn't go around turning these little transmitters on and making people lose their minds, so they rightfully stopped doing that. It is well known that naturally occurring Earth ionospheric magnetic oscillations will vary slightly in frequency, monthly, full versus new moon, and indefinite cycles related to sunspot activity. This may well explain observable full moon craziness, since both theory and laboratory tests prove that magnetic H-wave shielding is impossible at these psychoactive frequencies. Even with the highly sophisticated multiple iron or mu metal shielding, it can be speculated that ELF signals can be a powerful potential weapon with global capabilities in physiological warfare. The wavelength of an 8 Hz signal is 22,159 miles. I feel that tests should be undertaken with a number of remote ELF sensors that can be made directional in order to establish by triangulation the sources of these recently detected man-made disturbances. So he's just providing some recommendations in this report, and you can read through the rest of it if you like. I think that that's most of the relevant material that I wanted to cover in Bob Beck's report. So I'm going to add slides to the end of this report here for everybody, but just to kind of summarize everything, I think what you should do is basically kind of go through this information a little bit. And again, I'm going to, in the exact order that I went, I'm going to put it all on slides at the end of this presentation just for your consideration as an objective observer, as a person who may, happen upon this information and say like, what are you talking about with this cell phone nonsense? Or maybe you're just a person from whatever, I don't know. But I feel like this should bridge the gap of information between maybe people who are, legitimately, intuitive, can channel, are psychics, things of that nature. It should validate what they're discussing. It should validate both their ability and also why it's important for certain groups to have studied how to interrupt that, and why people who have psi ability could potentially be singled out or manipulated specifically because they have these abilities. You see, if they can be discredited or placed in a program where they're not allowed, out of a certain informational loop, they can just be used indefinitely to experiment on this exact method. And if a person has enormous psi ability, you can understand why they would be just the best research topic for a person outside of their awareness. A lot of times they don't ask for permission to do this, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted people to both really take this information in so that you can sort of like really evaluate why certain people that you may have thought are, might have been a little bit psychic or something along that lines. You may want to listen to them if they tell you that they've experienced some other things that might have involved people disrupting their privacy or getting into their lives, manipulating their perceptions and things of that nature, because it's very important, I think, a lot of times for them just to get, well, I'm not going to say it's important, but it's obviously like they're always looking for a person who's not aware of what's going on. So you see what I'm saying as far as a blind test? And there's too much information out there now that can draw correlations to both the psi phenomenon, what's going on with cell phone technology, how it desynchronizes the brain at times or can interfere with the hemisphering of the brain. We have reports from our own Army dating back from 1983 that demonstrates that they believe that the gateway experience, the hemisync, the hemisphering of our brains is a legitimate thing, that we are vibrational frequencies, and that we have this core frequency that this operates at, that some of these technologies have demonstrated disrupt. The reports are there. You can see the numbers yourself. If these are correlations that I shouldn't draw, that's fine. I'm just telling you that as a person that was in the wireless industry for a long time, once I saw this grouping of information all put together, this is what I personally find compelling, and that's why I'd like to share it with you today in my energetics research. Thank you very much for listening and watching. I appreciate your time.